really pretty meadow down here. Look at all those flowers. This is the water-wise garden, so everything here is designed to maximize water efficiency. These guys are all braided. I'm not sure why that is. I'm gonna have to look that up. But also, look at this beautiful purple flower. So I was doing something today that I don't usually tend to enjoy, but I'm going through some of my bookshelves and deciding some books that I want to keep and some books that I want to donate or give away to friends and family. And as I was doing this, it made me realize something. Even for a person who has a lot of queer-related books in their comic book collection, I just didn't realize exactly how many comics I had on this one shelf that were specifically like trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, authored, or themes, etc., etc. So I want to give you a little rapid fire thing. Cheer Up, Love and Pom-Poms by Crystal Fraser. Val Wise and Oscar Ode Jupiter is an adorable lesbian love story where a transgender cheerleader is looking to make the squad and also fall in high school love for the first time. Dates Volume 1 and 2 are some queer and trans comics anthologies of queer historical fiction. These are all comics. Greasebats by Archie Bongiovanni is a sort of like slice of life style comic of a bunch of different queer friends doing queer friend shenanigans. Very adult. Nimona by N.D. Stevenson. This was just recently the group book for the Queer Lit Readathon, and although Nimona is never explicitly stated to be under the trans umbrella, it is my headcanon that she is also the author, I believe, is under the trans umbrella. Power and Magic, the Queer Witch Comics Anthology, and Immortal Souls, its sequel, are a bunch of comics that are about queer and trans and non-binary witches. The Prince and the Dressmaker is a book about two best friends, one of whom realizes that he has a lot of fun and a lot of joy in expressing himself through his gender nonconformity. A Quick and Easy Guide to They Them Pronouns and A Quick and Easy Guide to Queer and Trans Identities. The titles kind of tell you what the book is about. Sapphic Zines, Volumes 1 and 2. Again, this is a collection of artwork and comics about sapphic folks, some of whom are trans and non-binary. Serving Pride, the Queer History Dinner Party Handbook. This is a queer history book that is a bunch of mixed media and artwork and a lot in here about trans activists. Clearly my bookshelves are full of too much trans joy for this tripod. We've got Stage Dreams by Melanie Gilman, which is a transgender historical fiction story about gender and racially marginalized people in the old American West. Tabula Idem, which is the Queer Tarot comic anthology. One of the editors of this anthology is transgender, and many of the contributors are as well. And When I Was Mean, Moments of Gender Euphoria, which is a collection about, you guessed it, gender euphoria. So yeah, this is about a foot worth of books that is just on this singular shelf. That is all about queer and trans comics. It's kind of surprising to me, but also a little bit not really, that I had so many queer and trans comic books. And this was just kind of a nice little thing to do in the midst of clearing out my bookshelves. Good afternoon to you from the garden. I have decided to visit a local garden, one of my favorite spots in town, partially inspired by the book that I just finished reading, which is called Fat Girls Hiking by Summer Michaud Skog. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I wanted to just get out and enjoy some nature, thought I'm feeling better. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the book later, but it's pretty much a essay and interview collection with some hiking trail reviews interspersed between them, specifically by the organizer of a group called Fat Girls Hiking that is about fat liberation and body positivity and getting fat people community and camaraderie and acceptance being in the outdoors and hiking. It was really, really good, and as always happens when I read books that are very nature-y, I always just want to go out and enjoy it. So I will share a couple pictures or things that I take while I'm here, but yeah, hope you enjoy.
Good morning, it's me. I finally got to end my COVID isolation, celebrating with a dinosaur and another dinosaur and the Incredible Hulk, who's not a dinosaur, but his brain is full of coffee. Happy weekend, peeps.
Hey everybody, it is June 22nd. It has been a hot minute since I last checked in with the stuff that I have been reading. Happy summer solstice yesterday, longest day of year. I have finished, I think 4 total books since I last checked in. One of them I don't have with me right now because my husband is currently reading it, but it's a little graphic novel called Garlic and the Vampire, which is an adorable little story about a little clove of garlic that is an anxious ball of anxiety and mess, and she gets volunteered out of all of the vegetables that live in the garden together to be the one that's going to go investigate the potential vampire's castle deep within the woods, because of course she is garlic and garlic is bad for vampires. I found this to be an absolutely adorable little graphic novel. It's a good, all ages read. The humor was just delightful, and I absolutely loved the quality of the facial expressions and the art style. That was really awesome. Another book that I finished reading, actually I picked up because I saw this on Fariba's channel, The Eclectic Reader. Fariba is somebody that I consider to be a booktube friend. We have been watching each other's stuff, I think, since right around the time we both started our channels, and she's really awesome. So go over and say hello to her. But she read recently American Zoo, A Sociological Safari by David Grazian. And this is a book I got from my library about zoos in the United States and kind of what the zoo is as a place where human beings gather to make sense of this thing that we call nature, that is kind of this collectively agreed upon fiction that, there is this difference between nature and the natural world, and then the sort of man-made world of buildings and urban areas, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of breaks down a lot of these binaries that we are used to thinking about in terms of zoos, in terms of nature versus the man-made environment. And each chapter talks about a different aspect of modern day and, since the beginning in the 19th century of American zoos. I found this book to be utterly fascinating. I am the kind of person that when I visit a new place, I do like to go check out, any place that's like a zoo or an aquarium or a garden. Yes, I am the weirdo that gets just as excited about the plants in zoos as I do about the animals. And there was actually a section of the book about that, about, how different zoos will attempt to create what is a realistic environment for their animals. So they'll try to plant, more desert-like plants where there are desert-like animals, or plants that are reminiscent of, say, the African savanna near the lion enclosures. But in many cases, they can't actually plant plants that are native to the locations where those animals originally live, that natural habitat, because those plants can't survive outside of a very specific environment. So they have to try and find plants that will grow in North America to sort of populate these exhibits. And I found this book to be completely fascinating. There was also a lot of discussion about the human aspect of zoos, not just the visitors, but the life and, experiences of people that work as zookeepers, how that profession changed from, more of a manual labor focused type thing that you didn't need like a degree to get that job. A lot of zookeepers were originally people that had just gotten out of prison or like were not able to get jobs anywhere else because of like criminal records. And then it turned over time into this profession that, is almost exclusively populated by women with advanced degrees, and it's turned into a lot of studies of animal behavior and how we can increase the animals' well-being in zoos. So it was fascinating. I could go on and on about how much I loved this book. I could not stop talking to my husband about it, so I'd highly recommend that. So thank you, Fariba, for sharing that on your channel. And then the next two books that I read recently are pretty short, both of them. One of them is a poetry collection called What Would Jesus Do? And Other Poems by Savannah Sipple. This is by an author who is a queer Appalachian writer in Kentucky. This is from a small press that I actually got when I was visiting one of my friends last year who lives in Louisville. And this book was pretty good. I really liked the author's poems in particular about her body and about existing in the world as a fat person in a body that, takes up space. And she is very like non-apologetic about that. And a lot of her poetry deals with kind of this non-apology for taking up space as a fat person, as a queer person, as someone who is like leaving behind the evangelical upbringing that she was raised with in order to just kind of fully inhabit the world and fully inhabit herself without trying to fit into the prescriptions of a very strict religious environment. So those were some good poems. And then the next thing that I read was, I don't know what I would call this exactly. It's called Off the Map, and it was originally published as a zine, but it's kind of like short book length. It's maybe, it's like 135 pages. This book is really weird. I picked this up when I was at the Anarchist bookstore in Pike Place Market, which I like to visit every so often. I can't visit it too often because I always want to spend too much money there because they have so many good books and I want to read all of them. But this was like a $5 book that was just a random zine that I found. And I was like, oh, it's like a travel narrative. It's these two women that are kind of hitchhiking and backpacking across Europe, but not in the way that, people stereotypically think of that now, where it's kind of like a rich person thing to do on a gap year. They're basically squatting and hitchhiking across Europe. And this is kind of a travel log of their experiences doing that. I think this was originally published in 2003. So there are some things that, come up that are a little bit more about like politics contemporaneous to that era. There's a lot of dunking on George W. Bush, which I'm always here for. But this book was really weird. For one thing, it was kind of confusing for about half the book, which I think is far too long, that I didn't realize that the point of view, like the narrator, was switching between the two women. And it was really weird because there was no indication of that. And they both sounded so similar in their writing and their voice that I literally could not tell you who was driving the point of view unless they referenced the name of the other traveling companion in the third person. So that was wild. And it's really like, it's almost an anti-narrative because it's a really rambling story that's kind of all over the place. It resists any sense of organization or plotting or even like logical flow from one thing to the next. It really felt like reading just a very earnest diary of a young person on their first time traveling. And as somebody that kept a very earnest diary as a young person on my first time traveling, I appreciate that, even as I know that this does not necessarily make for the most polished reading, let's say. So I think that like this was a good book to read, even as it was just really, really bizarre. Yeah, I just this was certainly very different from anything that I usually pick up, and it was just really weird as a book. So I read that. Right now I'm currently reading the book club pick for my romance book club. We're reading A Duke for a Lady by Alexis Hall, which is a queer historical romance where one of the main characters is transgender. And I'm loving it so far. It is full of all of the good, like, historical romance pining and angst that is just so much fun. And I'm really excited because when you read a romance, like, you know that the characters are going to actually get some happiness and joy at the end. And these two characters right now are just... they're perfect for each other, but they're both so sad. And I just want them to have a break for a second. And I'm excited that because this is a romance, they will. So I'm about 100 pages into that. It's like a 400-page book. So I will tell you more about my thoughts related to it as I get further into it. Talk to you soon. So here you can see me getting ready to make some strawberry champagne cupcakes. This was from a recipe that I got from the book Queerly Beloved, which was a queer romance that I read earlier in the month as part of my Queer Lit Readathon vlog. And this was in the middle of the heat wave, so I was being very careful, waited for the house to cool off a little bit before I started making these cupcakes. And I think they actually turned out pretty well. So I made the actual cakes with the champagne and strawberries in them, and then made a buttercream icing later the next day. Then in here as well, I actually finished my Goodreads reading challenge. I have already read 100 books this year. Go me! Hello everyone. It may be a little bit louder than you're used to here, but I have my fan going because we're in the middle of a heat wave here. It's always one thing or another, but yeah, it's been in excess of 90 degrees for 2 days now, and we don't have air conditioning. So we are doing our best to stay cool and stay hydrated. I haven't done a ton of reading, mostly because I've been too hot to do anything else. Yes, I know. But I did finish reading a book that I super enjoyed last night, and that was American Wolf, A Tale of Survival and Obsession in the American West by Nate Blakesley. I think I mentioned that I was reading this previously because I had heard Fariba talk about it on her channel as well. And I thought that this book was phenomenal. This was one of the best books that I have probably ever read. I would recommend it to anybody that likes nature writing or likes writing about the outdoors, or just sort of this almost like an ethnographic study of not just the wolves, but the park rangers and trappers and ranchers and hunters and people that all live around Yellowstone National Park. And what the book is about is the reintroduction of the American gray wolf into the lower 48 states via a program that reintroduced a pack of wolves that were taken from Canada, and then they reintroduced them into the land of Yellowstone National Park. So a lot of it is about not just the reintroduction of wolves to the biosphere and how that had an impact on the ecology of the area, but also how that interacted with, the politics of hunting and conflict between people that were very pro-wolf, pro-Endangered Species Act to people like ranchers and hunters and whatnot that were worried that wolves were going to be eating their livestock or cutting down on their access to game. Absolutely fantastic. Can't recommend that book highly enough. And you will have seen my cupcakes that I baked
in a little previous thing. That was the recipe from the back of Queerly Beloved, which I read last month, I think. I think I read it last month. I think. Anyway, there's a recipe in the back of it because the main character works at a bake shop and she loves baking. And the recipe is for strawberry champagne cupcakes, which I waited until 10 p.m. last night to make them because of how hot it was. I wanted to let the house cool down so that I could heat it back up again by making these cupcakes. And we had some today. We went over to visit our friends and I brought a bunch of the cupcakes so that we could eat them with our friends and their kids. And they were delicious. We demolished 9 cupcakes in like 10 minutes. It was really, really delicious. So, hope you all are doing well. Hope that, those of you living in the very hot and sunny climes are doing your best to beat the heat. I will speak to you soon. And I have no idea what I'm going to read next, so I guess you'll find out then. Hello, it is June 27th. I'm filming in my bedroom right now because we are currently on day 3 of a heat wave. And this is the coolest room in the house. It's like 90 something degrees outside and we have no AC, so I have fans going and doing all that stuff. But I wanted to do a quick reading check-in. I've been doing more of my reading at night now because it's been just too hot during the day. But this morning I finished reading this book, A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. This was a book that I had purchased potentially for a disability readathon TBR because it's by an autistic author and has an autistic protagonist. And this is like a middle grade aged book, but honestly it's something that you could probably enjoy at any age, like I know I did. This is a book about a girl named Addie who becomes interested in her town's history. She lives in Scotland near Edinburgh. In her town's history of witch trials and the people that were accused of being witches and were executed in her town. And she feels this kinship with the witches because they were tried, for being different or for not really fitting into the societies around them, and she feels this very strongly. I believe Annalisa from Annalisa's library also read this recently, and I just want to reiterate something that she said, which is just that this is a very good book, but this is also a very heavy book. There's a lot of bullying that Addie experiences because she's autistic, including some abuse that comes from a teacher, which personally hit very close to home for me because I was bullied and abused by a teacher in elementary school. But this book does a really, I think it does a very good job of portraying what that's actually like for a kid, and especially how confusing navigating that can be when you are not neurotypical. So I would definitely recommend this book. Just be aware that, going into it, there's a bit heavier subject matter. And then I have also been reading, again, Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness by M. Leona Godin. I have been reading this book off and on since I bought it, which is probably a couple years ago at this point. It's an essay collection and some of the writing is just very academic and dense. So it's been a book that I've picked up and put down and picked up and put down. But for whatever reason, last night I was reading it and I kind of just started going on a tear. Now I am over halfway through the book. I'm probably going to finish this. This will probably be one of the last books that I do finish this month. And this is exactly what it is. The author has written a bunch of essays about literature and blindness, about the history of blind people's inventions and education. She's written a lot about her personal experiences, both in academia as a blind woman and also becoming an actress, and what that has been like for her. I've seen a lot of similar thoughts and sentiments echoed in this book that I have seen throughout other blind writers and blind creators that I follow, specifically about in the theater and movie and television industries, actors and actresses who are not blind being given like preferential casting over actual blind people who are actors to get parts for blind characters. So this has been really a good read. It is very dense again, but I think that if this is something that you're interested in disability studies and in the combination of that with personal essay, which for me is
like the perfect combination of the things that I like to read, you will probably enjoy this book. I have also become very intrigued by the author's discussion of ocular centrism, which, to put it in one sentence, is pretty much just this idea that like eyes and seeing and whatnot are the best of the five senses that humans have. Their sight is supreme and primary and very frequently equated with knowledge and wisdom, etc., and how, you know, there's so much ableist language that creeps into our everyday words, like with phrases like going in blind or blind spot or blindsided or something like that. And so many of those things are just shorthand for not being aware of something or being indifferent to something, when in fact that is not equivalent with blindness or with, you know, not being physically able to see. And so this dismantles a lot of that in a way that I had thought about to some degree, but not as deeply as she explores it in these essays. And also, this book has given me a lot of other books that I want to read. She references a lot of other books. There's a bibliography at the end with a bunch of footnotes. So I have added a lot of books to my Goodreads TBR because of reading this. So I'm gonna probably go now, get back to doing some reading, trying to stay cool in this heat wave. I will let you know how these essays go shortly. So while it is unfortunate that it's 93 degrees outside, we have gone back to my favorite thing about extreme weather in the Pacific Northwest, is that I have the outside stuff all to myself, because no one wants to be out in the cold or the super hot or the super rainy or the super dry. So I'm taking advantage of that, and I'm super alone. Hello, I'm cheating a wee bit, finishing up my June reading vlog on July 1st, but that's just how it goes sometimes. So the last book that I finished reading for the month of June was The Premonition by Michael Lewis. This book is on the list of one of the best books that I've read this year. It's a book about the coronavirus pandemic that began in late 2019, early 2020, and pretty much examines not necessarily the virus itself or the majority of the pandemic, which we've all lived through, but the sort of failure of early response and early intervention systems to predict and respond to the pandemic in a timely manner. This charts a lot of the issues with the way that local public health offices are run in the United States, the fact that the director of the CDC, which was originally supposed to be a position that was filled internally, elected from among peers, became a presidential appointee and then was able to just be changed at the whims of whoever was in office. And a lot of this was about the science of public health and the fact that one of the most effective ways to deal with the pandemic is to do this sort of social distancing and social leadership, not just in the sense of staying 6 feet apart from each other, but doing things like closing schools, doing contact tracing, and all the variety of things that, people fought really hard to have happen, especially during the early stages of the pandemic, and how this was just a case of too little too late because of these systems that just failed us. So it was a really good read. It definitely made me feel kind of angry reading it, because I remember having some of these conversations with people at the beginning of the pandemic about being frustrated that places wouldn't require masking, because the fact of the matter is you can't really trust most people to self-monitor that to the degree that you need to enable in order to stop the spread of a deadly disease. You need somebody to come in and make that decision and say, okay, we are all wearing masks now. We are all doing contact tracing now. And that just didn't happen. So it was a really, really good book. I couldn't put it down. I quite literally finished it, I think, in just the last 2 days. And that's that for the June reading vlog here. So thank you to those of you that watched the first part of that, which was my Queer Lit Readathon reading vlog. I'll make sure that I have that nearby because that's kind of the part one of what I read in June. And I will be doing a bunch of different other like vlog projects and stuff for reading in July. I have a couple different themed things going on, but the regular reading vlogs will continue. And as always, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.